Now we are going to bring a group of change makers to the stage to talk about important new technologies that can help farmers and food producers to repurpose food surplus, turning it into profitable products such as animal feed and fuel, while meeting New York's organics waste ban on landfill disposal. Lori Leonard, Professor and Chair, Department of Global Development at Cornell University, will moderate the conversation. And if you want to add a question or a comment, you can do so by logging into our attendee hub and selecting the chat icon to the right of the viewing screen. Welcome, Lori.
So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this session on Agrifood Alchemy, tackling food surplus and creating circularity. I'm Lori Leonard. I'm a professor at Cornell University and chair of the Department of Global Development. And before we kick off the panel, I just want to say that this is a really exciting time to be talking about food surplus and creating circularity, especially in New York State. All of you know that we lose a lot of food in the field and along the supply chain, and that a lot of food is wasted in the retail and hospitality sectors, and especially in households. And many of you probably know, and you just heard from Kathy, that New York adopted an organics ban this past year that is an effort to keep some of that food out of landfills. And in fact, New York was one of several states to implement a new organics ban this past year. So this is really important, a really important step in dealing with hunger and food insecurity, but also in reducing the environmental footprint of food loss and food waste. So landfills are a really important source of greenhouse gas emissions, but probably more important than that, we are converting more and more of our forested land into agricultural fields, while at the same time we are wasting a very large proportion, somewhere in the range of 1/3 to 40% of the food that we produce that is never consumed. So as you'll hear from our panelists, some businesses have been working to keep food out of landfills well before the ban went into effect, but the law has really generated a lot of new energy around this issue. And so our panelists will be talking about some of the initiatives and the companies that have grown up around the idea that surplus food is a resource and that there are lots of things we can do with it that are good for people and good for the planet. So I have the pleasure of introducing our three panelists today. I will start to my left with Michael Borman, who is the Vice President of Operations with Natural Upcycling, a waste hauling company, but also much more than that. He will tell you more about that. Based in New York, many of you probably have seen their trucks and know about natural upcycling. They convert leftover food into energy also through digestion. And waste-to-energy projects like his have received a lot of attention in the wake of this new law, and Michael has a lot of experience with that he's going to share with us. To Michael's left is Sally Rowland. Sally is an environmental engineer with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. She's the chief of the Organics Reduction and Recycling section at the DEC. If you followed the implementation of the organics ban in New York, which went into effect January 1st of this year, you'll know that Sally really led the way on that. It's a very significant step in the effort to reduce food loss and food waste in the state. The process was incredibly careful and thorough, and there was a tremendous amount of public consultation, of data gathering, of information sharing in the lead up to January 1st. And Sally, while a very modest person, really masterfully orchestrated all of that work. To her left is Thomas McQuillan, who is the Chief Sales Officer of Do Good Foods. Of course, donating food to people who need it or use it is great, but if that's not possible, the next best use for leftover food, according to the EPA and other entities that have produced these food waste hierarchies, is for animal feed. And that's because that's really the only other recycling strategy that keeps surplus food in the human food chain. And this is what Do Good Foods does. They upcycle excess food that is not donated to create delicious food for humans. So we will start off the panel. I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we will open it up for audience Q&A. We welcome your questions, so please submit some. So I want to kick off the discussion by asking Sally to sort of set the stage for us and to describe the new organics ban in the state for those of you who are not aware of it, and to tell us a little bit about how it's working so far.
Sure. Thank you, Lori. Welcome, everybody. As Lori mentioned, I work for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And the group that I work in works with organics recycling. And one of our big emphasis right now is on food donation and food scraps recycling. I was fortunate this morning to see some of the pitches, and I'm very pleased to see that some are really related to reduction of food waste, reduction of certainly energy use, and other types of reuse. One of those key components that we're implementing right now is the Food Donation and Food Scraps Recycling Act, which was passed in New York State in 2019, kicked in this year, January 1st. And what it says is it kind of sets the foundation of changing the landscape of how we manage food in New York State. Certainly first, food donation, and then food scraps recycling. It's not in the title, but food minimization is certainly part of it too. We should never produce it in the first place, excess food, that kind of stuff. But the law itself says if you are what's called a designated food scraps generator, or a large food scraps generator, if you will, meaning 2 tons of food scraps per week that you generate, then in New York State, you must first donate to the maximum extent practicable. And then if you are within 25 miles of a viable recycler, and we can talk a little bit if you're interested in what's a recycler, there's lots of options under that, then you're required to recycle. So that kicked in January 1st this year. DEC has a number of responsibilities under the law. Who are those generators? That question comes up. We are required by the law to publish a list. So we have a list of who the generators are. There's some exemptions. One big one is New York City, because they have their own law, own local law. So we don't publish a list for New York City. But if you look on our website, each year DEC publishes a list of who these large generators are. And then we go about implementing how they should donate, recycle if they need to. We have grants, we have outreach and education. So it's a big program to do that. So we've been starting last year and then again this year publishing these lists. As you can imagine, it covers a lot of different types, from grocery stores, wholesalers, colleges, lots of different generators, to try to work with them to move the ball forward. We always get the question, well, what if there's not enough recycling capacity for all these generators? There's not. But that's part of the reason behind the law. It was kind of to spur this marketplace, the chicken egg kind of thing. If I have food scraps, why should I source separate them if there's no place to go? Why should I build a facility to recycle organics if it's not source separated and I can't handle it mixed? So the law is trying to push that marketplace, you push that relationships really together over time to see if we can build those relationships of move material. We've been very fortunate on the food donation side that we have partnerships. DEC funds Feeding New York State and smaller organizations for food donation assistance, and they've gathered more than 1.5 million new pounds of food donation through the law just by outreach and going out to grocery stores. It's interesting to see when they go out, you would think, well, most grocery stores donate already, that kind of stuff. They do. But when Feeding New York State goes to a grocery store, what they find is that grocery store or restaurant doesn't know the whole variety of materials, especially fruits and vegetables, prepared meals, things like that, that can be donated that that store may not have been aware of. So they're getting, it's not just new donation, they're getting phenomenal increased donation from existing donators. So it's very exciting to see that happen on the donation side. On the recycling side, we are seeing some growth in recycling facilities in the last year since the law kicked in, but of course we'd like to see more and more. And when we say organic recycling facilities, you'll hear about some options. You'll hear from people that really do the work, not just me who talks about it. So you'll hear there's lots of options out there. In DEC, we've always been in the philosophy of not one size fits all. You need to figure out what works for you, small scale, large scale. Could be animal feed, could be composting, anaerobic digestion. There's lots of things that work. So it really comes down to that, those generators, haulers, communities, facilities, waste management companies, what makes a sense in that for those materials. And we like to see it all work. It can be a community compost site in New York City. It can be a large regional digester in Western New York. They all work, and we're all trying to get to the same endpoint. As Lori mentioned, one of the big drivers now is we have a climate act in New York State. It's called CLCPA, which has a scoping plan which is going to be finalized by the beginning of next year. One of the items in the scoping plan is addressing methane emissions from landfills, from leaks. So what generates the methane in landfills is organic degradation. So we're trying to get that food out of that landfill from a climate perspective, as well as just from it's the right thing to do perspective. So that's another driver for us of how do we get material, food scraps out of that landfill. And yeah, I certainly welcome if you have any questions about what we do, about the law, bring it on.
Great. Thank you, Sally.
Yeah.
So now I think I want to ask Thomas and Michael to each take a little bit of time to provide a brief description of the work that your companies do and maybe reflect on how the law, if it's changed at all, what you do, how it's done that. Maybe we could start with Thomas.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. So I'm with Do Good Foods, and just as you heard, we're interested in capturing surplus food at the retail level. I think it's really interesting in all the years I've been working in this space, we need to change the narrative and refer to food as usable. So food to feed people, food to feed animals, food to feed soil, and get away from all this negative conversation around sort of like you're doing somebody a favor because you're using the assets you manage. This is just the way we should be running our businesses. But we partner with retailers and say, hey, we'll take all the food that you didn't sell to someone or didn't donate out to a 501(c), we'll take 100% of that as long as the food isn't degraded. And so what we wind up capturing is literally thousands of pounds of food a week per store. And what we do is we build out facilities that can process that food, essentially cook it, dehydrate it, and turn it into feed. That feed then goes in to feed the Do Good chickens. Right now we're doing chickens. That's our first solution. And each one of our chickens will eat in its lifetime about 4 pounds of food that would have gone to landfill. And so those 4 pounds, just as you heard, if they go to landfill, are going to release about 3 greenhouse gases. So each chicken essentially eliminates 3 greenhouse gases. So we can not only measure this for ourselves, but for our customers, for the retailers we partner with, for the chef partners we have at the food service level. And so everybody's sort of involved in the solution. The retailer no longer sends food to landfill. We capture it, we turn it into feed. Our chefs and retailers are now part of a solution in selling a product that has utilized food that was once squandered. And I think that those types of solutions are what you're going to see more and more of. But we have a deliberate impact on the environment in that process. And also we create a closed loop, right? So the food's collected in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Our chickens are raised in Delaware, and then they're shipped out along the eastern seaboard primarily. So it becomes a nice, tight, circular solution.
Yeah, so at Natural Upcycling, we also work with, we're primarily a food hauler, but we see ourselves as a food recycling company, so we are a full service provider for our customers. We primarily work with medium to large scale food manufacturers, grocery retail, and hospitals and schools and the like. And so when we go into a customer, we try to find the best solution for that particular food, whether it is, we consult with them on whether that goes to food donation or animal feed or anaerobic digestion or composting. And so, as we build relationships with our customers, we try to show progress with them of, okay, here at the beginning, you were disposing of this much through your compactors. Now, as we've pulled X, Y, and Z from your compactors, you're now the waste that's going to landfill is much lower. You're paying less, and these food scraps and other products are being put to a better and higher use. And so we, as I mentioned, we're a full service provider. So we'll take anything and everything from them from a food perspective, whether it's just off the shelf or been rotting in a bin for 3 weeks. And so we collect in 11, or let's see here, from Boston all the way down into North Carolina, all along the eastern seaboard here. We collect from all the Wegmans grocery stores, Trader Joe's, Costco's, and now Lidl's grocery stores. And lots of large food manufacturers and small ones in between.
Great. Thomas, I want to ask you a little bit about scale, because in the conversion of excess food to animal feed, there's often this question that comes up. And I know that there are a couple of newish aggregators in the Northeast. Feedback Earth is based in Grafton, Massachusetts. A new company called Bright Feeds is located in both Connecticut and Massachusetts. Very large-scale operations that are transforming food scraps or excess food into animal feed. What's the scale issue with doing that?
Well, when we start to think about the fact that we have $165 billion worth of food that will be squandered this year in our country, I mean, what industry, what business treats its assets so irresponsibly? I mean, we are going to feed animals, we're going to feed ourselves, we spend all this energy creating this food, and then we don't use it. It's just absolutely makes no sense to me. Unfortunately, the scale is massive. In one of our facilities, we can take 160 tons a day. I mean, that's a lot of food. This is, mainly produce and meat products, but we'll take other things that are in the grocery store. But it's really amazing how much food was going to landfill. One of the good things that happens in this process, once you start looking at food that you once called the W word, which if you know me, I don't say it, you start to say, oh, wait a minute, maybe we can use this food, or we need to order a little bit less. So what we see with our partners, they're starting to send us less, which we celebrate, because then we can take on other partners. Actually, maybe this is a good time to show the video. I forgot to say that earlier.
Sure,
so we have a quick 60-second video. You can find this on YouTube. It does a really good job of sort of explaining our solution, and maybe you can sort of adopt this for your own business.
In the US, we throw away more than 80 billion pounds of food each year. That's approximately 40% of our food supply. Can you imagine buying 5 bags of groceries and tossing 2 of them away? It's reality. Today, there's more food waste in our landfills than anything else. And what's worse, all that waste is releasing greenhouse gases at an alarming rate. It's time to do things differently. Now is the time to do something good. Do Good Foods has found a way for us all to be part of ending food waste. That starts and ends at the grocery store. We collect nutritious surplus groceries such as fruits, vegetables, meats, and breads after donations occur, and load that food into coolers, destined for our production facility, where it is all upcycled into nutritious animal feed. That feed is then sent to growers who feed it to their chickens. And then we sell our Do Good chicken to you. What does this mean? It means each person who buys a delicious Do Good chicken saves 4 pounds of food from going to landfills and 3 pounds of greenhouse gas emissions. It means doing good for your plate and our planet are one and the same. Learn more about how you can join the Do Good mission at dogoodfoods.com.
I think a critical thing for us to talk about here is, and it's really all of our responsibility to do this, is to educate the general population about what happens to food we choose not to eat. What I find really interesting, last night I was at a bar here in Syracuse, and a couple next to me asked me why I was here, which I thought was interesting, but nonetheless. And we had a great conversation. I talked a little bit about food to landfill and the impact of food to landfill. And the reaction was, I had no idea that that actually occurs, that methane is released from this food, and that I'm contributing to it. So we have our work cut out for us. But what I would encourage you to think about is, try not to make it seem like it's a punishment to not send food to landfill, but a celebration. How can we put this food to use to benefit our environment? The only thing we should be adding to our soil that's degraded or desertified is food. It's the very thing we send to landfill is our solution to reverse desertification in our country and in our world. We have this at our hand. We need to take this very seriously and work together. We shouldn't see the law in New York State as a punishment. This is something to celebrate and work together to rebuild the system.
Great. Sally, our neighbors in some of the New England states that have had organics bans in place longer than New York has become more inclusive in the way that they structure those laws. Massachusetts went from 1 ton a week to half a ton a week this year, I believe, or last year. Vermont is all-inclusive. It applies to everybody, even at the household level. What do you see as the future in New York, and what do we need in order to be more inclusive in terms of the 2-ton metric?
Yes, that 2 tons is set by legislation. So it would take an amendment to the law in New York State to bring that down to lower levels, which, as you said, has been done in other states. Actually, it's one of the recommendations in the scoping plan under the CLCPA that is one way to address organics and waste, is to amend the law and to bring that level down. So we certainly would support that. We think that's something we need to head towards. We want it to become, just like people are familiar with, recycling bottles and cans, that you recycle food scraps, whether it's the whole level from commercial down. So we think that's something that certainly should be done. We're, of course, always exploring how can we help, even if the law changed tomorrow. Is it funding? What is it to turn that corner to make sure we get more operations like we have going up here, that we have that more prolific in the state.
Mm-hmm. And maybe I can ask Michael about sort of infrastructural impediments to collecting more food scraps, whether it's at grocery stores or at households, or, obviously hauling water is not a very cost-effective thing to do. What are sort of the infrastructural impediments to?
Sure. Yeah. So as the ban came into place, or effective January 1st of this year, one of our biggest obstacles actually has been getting trucks, which is not specific to our industry, but because of different backlogs during COVID and production. So that actually, for us personally, has been one of our biggest factors is we just can't buy enough trucks to get on the road to do the collections, things like that. I would say, when you're looking at the different streams, whether it's from food manufacturing, grocery, retail, residential, there's a lot of different obstacles that are for each one of those. So, if you're talking about residential, education would be the by far the biggest difficulty that we have, is just getting people to understand what the difference between food and the rest of their waste is. People see garbage as garbage as garbage as waste, and you know, I think New York State has done an okay job with, you know, in the past 20, 30 years with recycling and getting that to be kind of part of the ethos of the culture of recycling, and these are the things that can be recycled, and kind of these organics is that next step into that of what is an organic. And you know, I get a question a lot when I use the term organics. They're like, well, no, it's not organic. It's you know, they use pesticides. I said, no. We're talking about the whole, you know, organic nature of the food. And you know, Thomas made a good point of education. So you know, we send a lot of material and through composting and compost production. And there is a lot of confusion out there of, well, isn't it going to compost in the landfill? And you know, you have to explain, like, no, it's a very different process that's going on in a landfill versus a compost site. So, you know, education, public education of the issues as well as what the solutions are going to be a large factor in moving forward with this law and tightening it down and reducing the amount of food that gets sent to landfill. And then, you know, I would say processing capacity is something that it is an impediment, but I think it's something that will get worked out. It's just a lot of these large-scale processing, whether it's for processing for animal feed or processing for anaerobic digestion, it takes time. It takes, you know, investment to get the infrastructure in place to where it can accept large volumes and large amounts of food.
Yeah. One of the new debates, I think, is around depackaging and plastics, microplastics in particular, getting into animal feed streams. Thomas, do you have any experience with that or any knowledge of that, or what is your experience with depackaging?
Yes. One of our requirements with our retail partners is to depackage at the store site. So what we do is we provide these very large coolers. We capture all the meat products and fish in one, and we'll take the fish bones, the eyes, everything, and then produce in another. But what we require is that they depackage. When the food comes to us, it does go through a metal detection machine, so because we want to make sure we're not passing that along to the animals. But it is an enormous amount of packaging. And it's such a great question because, you know, if you're shopping organic, you may want to ask the produce manager why he or she is wrapping every piece of organic produce in plastic. And invariably what they'll say to you, that's the only way we could guarantee to you that was actually organic. Did it grow with that plastic on? At some point along the supply chain, the plastic was put on it. But why are we doing that? We don't believe someone along the supply chain so we can't solve one problem, create another. We need to come up with comprehensive solutions and own the fact that plastic we take off, it's ours. What are we going to do with it? And that's really the value of the sort of scope 3 that we're heading towards, where people start to think about, hey, I created this waste stream, and I don't divorce myself from the waste stream when Michael's company takes this from me. It's still yours. You own it for its lifetime. That's a major shift. And that, I think, will get us to start thinking differently about the way we manage these assets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, microplastics are a huge issue, and what we, you know, in the industry have been trying to shift the conversation around what is, you know, natural upcycling going to do about it, or what is Do Good Foods going to do about it? Well, it's like, well, we want to come up with the solutions, and we you know, we were born out of a dairy farm, and so, you know, agriculture and farming and being good to the soil is in our DNA as a company, and so obviously we want to do everything we can to prevent plastics and microplastics from getting into our stream, but at the end of the day, it's a full conversation with the consumer, but also with the manufacturer and the types of packaging that gets used, and then, you know, the processes in between and getting it from grower to table. That really needs to be a full conversation to help eliminate this problem as an issue.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Maybe we should think about taking some audience questions.
It's a great idea. We can go ahead and get started with that. So this first one is kind of two parts, so I'll go with the first part first to not overwhelm you guys. So it's how big does a farm have to be able to integrate digesters and other upcycling technology?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We get that a lot. There's the traditional mindset of, well, a farm has to be a certain size to be able to accept or to build an anaerobic digester. And really the economics around digestion have shifted a lot in the past 10 years from taking just manure and using the renewable energy credits to looking at it from a holistic perspective of, okay, if I'm going to be taking in food waste, that'll help with the economics, because as a hauling company, as a food waste recycler, we're going to pay a tipping fee to an agricultural entity for taking that waste or that material and running it through the digester, and then in the end spreading it as fertilizer on the land. So there aren't any really, I can't give you a cow number or an acre number of. It's really about location. And then also the mindset of, I'm gonna create solutions that we can, find solutions for different types of food waste. And so, you really have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. There's anaerobic digesters that are built on 15,000 cow dairies, and then there's anaerobic digesters that are built on places that don't have any cows at all. And so it's everywhere in between that. So there really is no one set number you can give to acreage, or it just depends on what their level of involvement wants to be, and what the economics of that specific scenario would look like.
And I think we're starting to see a shift from a farmer builds a digester and then decides if they want to take in food scraps, to private digester companies may build a digester on a farm in conjunction with that farm, where they have more control over it and they can bring in off-site organics. So it's not just what farmer anymore is going to build their own, it's like what scenario. Yeah, right. It makes the most sense whether it's a private farmer relationship or private alone or farmer alone. The industry is certainly evolving.
About 10 years ago, I visited the Monterey dry digestion facility, which I would encourage you to do. It's fascinating. And I don't know if it exists in that form, but what was really interesting is the gentleman who was showing me how the dry digestion chambers worked. He showed me how sticks and leaves, and of course the animal effluent, which gets the digestate fired up, plus food, were 4 important ingredients in creating the energy, which then gets captured and powers the Monterey facility. And I just thought, well, isn't this amazing? Like, here we had 4 items that, we all struggle to get rid of our leaves, get rid of our sticks, get rid of our food, get rid of our effluent. And meanwhile, here is a solution where we absolutely need it to create this energy. But at the end, we've got this phenomenal digestate that goes right back to the farms in Monterey. We've got to move away from thinking that we're doing somebody a favor and make this an integral part of the way we think about how we manage food products. It's not the W word. It is a food asset that we're putting to use, in this instance, to create energy and ultimately digestate to rebuild our soil system. We've got to make that paradigm shift. And then we'll start looking at these solutions differently.
Great. So kind of the follow-on part to that is, what are the labor demands and how do small and mid-sized farms take them on without compromising their core farm operations?
Go ahead, Michael.
So it's for me, I guess. A lot of digestion salesmen. So in my previous roles, I worked for anaerobic digestion construction companies and managing digesters. And so that's a really great question, because a lot of digestion companies or salesmen will try to sell these systems to farms, say, don't worry about it. You check on it an hour a day. It runs itself. You don't have to worry about it. And then they build a $5 million system, and it is not running within a year. And so really, building a digester system takes a lot of buy-in from the employees, from the owners, and really have to have the mindset of we're going to make this work, we're going to figure it out, because it's not going to run itself. So on a typical, I would say a typical dairy operation, if you have one person that is maybe not, it's their full-time job, but they are the point person, the sole responsible person for that equipment and making sure that it's operating at its best level, that's really sufficient. And then, as your system grows with types of waste it's taking in, that sole person's responsibilities kind of will shift slowly more and more to that side of the business entity. Really, if you're talking about just an on-farm digester that's going to dabble in taking food waste, that one person really would be enough. If you're talking about growing it into an actual organics acceptance facility, organics recycling facility, then you have to look at, what types of materials you're going to be accepting, what the volumes are, and then, you've got to look at, whether you need to bring on, another person or two to be able to handle that material.
Thank you. Okay, so our next question is, does the law prefer food waste, composting / digesting over excess food distribution for human or animal consumption?
The law specifies that all of these large generators first donate to the maximum extent practicable is actually the words in the law. So first comes food donation. After that, with what remains, it has to go to an organics recycler is what the law says. And under that, the law does not, and our regs don't have a preference, which I kind of like, actually. We kind of like saying it's going to be a mix. We understand it's going to be mixed. Composting, digestion, animal feed, fermentation, and even says other processes approved by DEC, because there may be some new magic widget that's 5 years from now of how to process organics that we're not using right now. So we don't have a hierarchy for the organics recycling. We are amenable to all types.
There's the EPA hierarchy,
Yes.
right, does state preferences, but, I've interviewed people like Sally from all the states that have organics bans, and, none of the other states have hierarchies either. I mean, their perspective is that the most important thing is just to get people to recycle organics. And once you start doing it, then you start thinking about, you encounter people like Michael who can walk through the options with you so that you can figure out what's best. So I think that, the EPA hierarchy is based on economic, environmental, and, social good in the ways that they define that. And I do think there is something to sort of cleaving off the recycling strategy that is diverting for animal feed, precisely because it keeps food scraps in the human food chain, which is where we want them. But that's not always possible.
So are there other parts of the law in New York State that are kind of different than some of these other laws that are in neighboring states? And what are those?
Yes, as you can imagine, each state has kind of their own little flavor to what's in their law. In the Northeast states, it's kind of like the Northeast and then the West Coast, and there's a few in between, are really focused on local or state laws. It's mostly related to one. New York, I believe, is one of the few states that actually has a food donation requirement. The other states have seen increased food donation because of the laws, but New York State has a specific food donation requirement in it. New York is different that DEC is required to publish a list of these large generators. The other states are not. Those generators are obligated to comply, but it's not on the agency to publish a list. So we have to publish a list, we notify them, that kind of things. And then, as we've mentioned, the other states, it may be a distance requirement. how far to a recycler. New York State has 25 miles. Connecticut, I think, started with 20. Now they're at 10. Massachusetts doesn't have one. So there's a lot of nuances to those kind of things. Obviously, the basic theme is the same in all the states, but the implementation and how those details, and Vermont goes all the way down to residential, that kind of thing, over time. So yeah, there are definitely some differences amongst the states.
Thank you. All right, we have a couple more questions in queue here. If anyone in the audience has any and you would like to ask them, feel free to write them down. There's some scrap paper and pens laying around, and bring them up to me and we can get them in the queue. So next is, how critical is it for our society today to move beyond landfill disposal and turn what can be a negative food waste into a positive, new innovative uses of waste?
Thomas.
That's my baby. I think I was asked to speak at the closing of the Fresh Kills landfill in Staten Island, New York. For those of you who ever took the Outer Bridge crossing into Staten Island, you would have smelled it 10 years ago really bad. Anyway, the city of New York was celebrating the fact that that's now a bike path and everybody's all excited about it. So they were asking me to keynote. They should have known better, because when all the dignitaries were done, I was last, and I said, on this spot, 100 feet below where we stand today, was the most beautiful estuary on the East Coast, where egrets and birds flocked here on their migration to Florida and back up to Canada, and we've completely destroyed it. One of your children will dismantle this pile and extract all the assets that are now buried inside it, because we chose not to manage our assets properly. Well, of course, the whole front row, everybody's upset, people crying, thinking about the impact. How dare we celebrate this pile? The point is, we need to look at the way we manage our assets as a business. Forget about sustainability. It's just the way we manage our assets. We're responsible for those for their whole lifetime. And that is the paradigm shift. Let's look at this food as useful. Let's look at old tires. How do we reuse that asset? And again, the New York State law is a beautiful law. It sounds like punishment for some folks, but at the end of the day, it is a solution. Years ago, I was at Baldor Specialty Foods in New York, and I managed their zero organics to landfill strategy. November 10th, 2016, the company went to zero. That company is 2,000 employees, and it almost sounded like it was impossible to do. There were so many wonderful ancillary benefits to never sending food to landfill, and we, for the state of New York, became a place where everybody wanted to visit. How did you do it? Why did you do it? I would say the most important change, in addition to the food no longer going to landfill, was the cultural change around food and the value food brings to us. That is the most impactful part, in my opinion. And I'm so proud to say I'm gone almost a year, and there's still a zero organics to landfill solution. Over 40 million pounds of food diverted from landfill at this point.
One of the pioneer really in food donation and prior to our organics bans was France, and it was not for nothing that it was France, right? Because there's a real culture there of celebrating food and seeing food as an absolute resource.
Yeah.
Thank you. Our next question is, how far in the future do you see food waste pick up from homes like trash and recycling?
Not very far.
Michael.
Not very far into the future. One of the challenges when you're looking at residential is getting kind of a critical mass for routing from an economic perspective. And so we see a lot of municipalities starting up programs. New York City did it a couple years ago. The key takeaway on that, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be education of those residences, because if there's a lot of issues with the rollout in New York City of people would just get, the municipality delivered new bins to all the customers. Nobody knew what they were for, and then they just put, it's another trash bin, and filled it with their trash. And so the rollout of these programs is what's really going to be critical to this success. And so I don't know if I can put a number on how many years. Maybe Sally can. She knows something I don't from a regulatory perspective, but I would say it's, probably in the next less than 10 years, 5 to 10 years, it easily would be more acceptable.
Yeah, I think an interesting thing we're seeing is not just going from nothing to commercial residential collection. I mean, New York City certainly exception to the rule, but we're seeing a lot of drop-offs. It's kind of almost like a learning tool, I think, for the municipality as much as for the residents to say, okay, here's a place you can bring your food scraps. Could be a neighborhood or a drop-off spot, and then it's collected from there and taken to recycling. So certainly you'll get motivated people, because if they're willing to bring it there, then they're motivated to keep it cleaner. But it's kind of for a municipality to get their feet wet to say, okay, this can work. We can pick it up, we can move it, people are interested, and get a gauge for how much interest in that community before they move to the next step of, okay, I'm picking it up at everybody's curb. So we see a lot of that kind of residential drop-off systems all across the state have really grown phenomenally in the last couple of years.
If you look at Tompkins County has been a really big success story with such a model like that of the drop-off, and they're looking at, okay, how do we take this to the next level, to the next.
And also, I think people are finding the value. If you go into New York City at the YMCA youth hostel, they have about 1,100 young people staying there a night. They have an eco-rich system. The eco-rich system takes in all the organic food product every day. It macerates it, heats it, and over a 24-hour period creates like a digestate. And that product is then resting for about 21 days. It looks like soil. It's beautiful. And they donate it to St. John the Divine Church, which is right up the street. And they've been rebuilding their gardens with it. So once again, a product that we thought we had to manage and get rid of, we now are rebuilding gardens in our community. The point I'd like to make is there's no reason for the food to be hauled. It can be managed right here. And just like you see dishwashers in restaurants, you're going to see mechanisms that manage food down the road and then convert it into a usable soil. We should be doing this in the city of New York. We bring soil into the city of New York every year. There's no need to. We have food product that can be converted into soil right in New York. It never has to leave. And I think this is happening. It's already happening, but we're going to see a lot more of that sooner than you think.
Thank you. Our next one is, what role do institutional purchasers in New York play in the food surplus economy? Hospitals, schools, etc.
Love that.
Yeah, so they play a huge role in not only, looking at, we work with food purchasers, with our customers and our partners, and looking at, hey, we see a lot of this one material in your stream. Maybe we can look at what it would take to order less of that or process less of that. And so we're looking at it on both the food side as well as the packaging side, and working with the purchasers on finding alternative forms of packaging that are easier for their employees, easier for our employees to separate from the food.
There are a lot of new businesses too, like Lean Path and Winnow, that help food service providers to look at what they're wasting, what they're using, what they're wasting. Some of them are really sophisticated. A lot of our universities and colleges, their dining facilities are adopting them. They can tell, they can order more effectively and more efficiently. And I think that's been a big business.
And if you're a farmer in the audience or a food processor, challenge the distributor you do business with to say to them, look, I know you sent me a PO for 10 cases of 225 count lemons, but I have 15 cases of 300 count lemons. Can you help me? We need to build systems that aren't so rigid to say, well, the PO said 225 count lemons, we didn't have any, so we didn't ship anything. That's got to stop. We've got to be much more collaborative in helping the farmer move more product. So whatever comes into the packing shed is eventually going to get shipped. The systems need to be changed at the distribution points to adjust for the needs of the farmer. and that's going to put a lot more of this food to use as well.
To your point, Thomas, it makes me think of a story. We process a lot of food from food manufacturers, and we received an order from, it was Heineken beer, and we received probably 2 or 3 truckloads of it. And what's the issue? Well, it was, they had a marketing campaign for 12 packs, but they packaged them in 15 packs. Oh. And it was, so they did some economic calculation that said, well, it's cheaper for us to dispose of this product. Luckily, they dispose of it in a proper way, sending it to a digester, rather than changing their marketing advertising for whatever sale they were working on.
All right, I think we have time for one more quick one, if that's okay.
Sure.
Does New York have any programs to help educate youth about minimizing food waste or connect youth that are passionate about upcycling food surplus?
Sally.
There are quite a few. Certainly, I would ask to reach out to us. We certainly try to channel. We have different outreach and education programs, grant programs. We work with Pollution Prevention Institute at RIT and Feeding New York State, and we have the Center for Ecotechnology now that works with us. So there's lots of avenues, lots of information out there, but we can certainly help focus what they're interested in to where the right place to locally probably, I assume, would be best for them to use their energies. But more power to them. Obviously, we need all the help we can on education and outreach going forward.
So I should close it up. Thank you to our panelists. That was really fun and illuminating. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us for this past hour.